Hello, welcome to CarCast+Edmunds. I'm Matt, the moderator DeAndrew, here with Alistair Weaver from Edmunds.com. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Just back from the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. So I did about 25,000 steps yesterday, but a hell of a show. Amazing show.
It's been a while since I've been out there, and it's been it's kind of a jam-packed week for everything. So I don't know. I felt like I rushed that intro. Felt a little rushed. It's just because we're really kind of limited on time, and we both got a ton of other things on the schedule. But I really wanted to get into the CES stuff while it is fresh, among a couple of other things. I kind of want to just start with a post you made on LinkedIn. You were saying that Tesla has recently cut their range estimates on their cars. And this is something that you guys have been talking about at Edmunds.com for a while. You've been testing the EV cars, you've been doing your Edmunds test, which we know is a pretty fair overall test. Plus, it's an apples to apples test because you take these cars and you do them all through the same sort of range test. And some cars have done well, some cars have underperformed, and Tesla has notably underperformed again and again. I don't know. Do you think what's happening with Tesla? What's going on with Tesla? They're reevaluating their range. Maybe this is your fault. I can't say for sure.
So it's I fear we're probably part of the in there as part of the course. But if you go back, the backstory to this is really super interesting. And you mentioned the LinkedIn piece. News came out at the end of last week that Tesla was cutting its range estimates pretty much across its fleet, about 6% on some of the Model Ys. And I threw up a little LinkedIn piece. I did it like 3 p.m. PST on a Friday. And I thought, nobody's going to read this. And like I woke up Saturday morning, and like my phone had got, you get those messages like on your iPhone, and it says like it's suddenly like this thing was blowing up. And I think now it's done like 80,000 impressions on LinkedIn, and tons of commentary. And it was like, why is everybody on LinkedIn on a Saturday?
Yeah.
But it also showed like how hot this topic actually is. And all I was doing really was recalling our experience and a story that we've had trying to sort of educate the consumer. I don't want to sound too pretentious, but our job is really to kind of try and provide car shoppers with an honest, open and fair comparison of vehicle to vehicle. And we set up this Edmunds EV range test about 3 years ago now. And when we first published it, the Teslas didn't hit their EPA range estimate. In fact, no Tesla we've ever tested, and I think there's up to 8 now, has ever hit its EPA range figures, whereas most actually exceed them, sometimes quite considerably. So anyway, we put this up 3 years ago. We got a very aggressive response from Tesla, who said, what you haven't done is take into account the buffer. So when your car hits an indicated 0, there's still about 25 miles of range left. Therefore, we hit the EPA estimates. Therefore, can you please change the page? And we said, well, not sure it really works like that. And so we got together a Tesla from Tesla, a couple of Teslas, one that was my personal car, one that was Edmunds owned, and we took along a bunch of other EVs, and we all went to a proving ground near Mojave, and we ran a test which basically proved that there was a bit of a buffer, but it varied from car to car, and it certainly wasn't 25 miles consistently and everything else. So basically we said, look, this is BS. We stand by the story. This was about 3 years ago, and we were pretty much a lone voice. And then last year, Reuters started getting into it with an investigation about how Tesla was deliberately shutting down owners' range concerns, that they were trying to essentially make the whole problem and make all the noise go away. And we actually contributed to that investigation. And then the Department for Justice also started to launch an investigation into Tesla's range claims. Fast forward to last week, and suddenly Tesla cuts its range estimates, and they're just updated on the site. There's no explanation from anybody. So all I was doing is saying, look, this is the story as we've seen it, and it's nice that finally something has changed, and now the figures that Tesla are quoting are more akin to what we experienced in our real world test. And we've now tested 75 EVs, so it's quite a big, it's quite a big sample size.
Yeah. I'm I'm curious on what's happening on LinkedIn with all of this. Why do you think this is now becoming so much noise in a sense? I mean, it's just you guys have been saying it for so long, and I think others are kind of figuring it out. Is it just because Tesla sort of conceded to it and going, yeah, you were right. They finally kind of admitted that there was maybe a slight miscalculation here.
I, I mean, I think that there are lots of issues with the way that automakers assess range. So you can have, without getting too technical, you can have something called the 5-cycle test or the 2-cycle test. And most people use the 2-cycle test. Tesla and a lot of the startups like Rivian, for example, Lucid, use the 5-cycle test, which is more complicated but tends to give you better results. And also, and a lot of the startup brands are also wanting to promote their results. So it's all about getting the biggest number possible. Whereas some of the legacy brands, particularly like Volkswagen, for example, who was off the back of all the Dieselgate fiasco, is deliberately trying to play it safe so they don't get into a world where people are calling foul. The reality is, the consumer, it's massively confusing. And this is a really important component in whether people are going to switch to EVs or not. How far will I go on a single charge? And the reality is, you never drive the whole range anyway, because you never really drive it down to zero. But this is an important component. And so now we've set up like an efficiency test, a charging test, and a range test, which is kind of like the holy trinity of what the data points that you need if you're choosing an EV. How fast, how long am I going to be stopped at a charger? How far am I going to go on a single charge? And ultimately, how much am I going to be paying?
Right.
And it's just tough for the consumer, because it's like, what is the actual reality? And our test is done in Southern California, and we're very open about that. It's driving sensibly in Southern California over a mix of highway and urban driving. And we're extremely fastidious on how we drive. We even had developed our own software app to control how we drive, to make sure that we're having an apples to apples comparison. But then, of course, if you go to Michigan and you go into the snow and it's freezing cold, your range is going to drop. And we talk about this on the site, but it's hard to come up with a figure that says this is how far your car will go, because there's so many factors.
When you start bringing weather into it, there's it's even harder to control that type of test, because now you don't know how different manufacturers' batteries will react to all of those scenarios. So you really can't do it. So you kind of have to do it in sort of an ideal weather environment, so you can just go off of the best case scenario from the manufacturer standpoint, how they deliver the car. To be honest with you, with this Ford Lightning that I have, I've been on a bunch of groups and forums and stuff, and a lot of people post things about range, and every time I look at it, they're in some crazy weather. Right now, obviously, they're all in very, very cold weather, and there's some significant changes in range, and there's no real way to test that, because now, like, everybody's it's cold weather, sure, but what does that mean? Is it 40 degrees or is it 9 degrees, right? And then for how long? And is the car outside before they drove it in the morning, or is it in a garage? Like, there's too many things but there's too many things to measure, but it does make a huge difference. So what you guys can do is just sort of take a look at the most, I don't know, the most ideal conditions, and then test from there.
Yeah, it's a sort of apples to apples. I mean, the other thing is, it's not just a case of, because obviously we've looked at this. It's not just a case of saying, okay, if it's 0 degrees, then your battery range will diminish by 40%. Because we're all used to going to, if you take your mobile phone to a super cold climate, the battery doesn't last as long. But or if you ever like taking a film camera to the Arctic, as I have, it's like you get like 6 minutes of filming and the thing's dead. But the problem is, it's all about how the individual car manages its batteries as well, and how it manages the cooling or the protection of its batteries. So it's not even a case of saying, okay, for every 10 degrees drop in temperature, your battery goes down 5%, because it's all dependent on the individual car. And there's things like, I know that the Mach-E at times has performed worse than, say, something like the Audi e-tron, because the way that it's engineered is different. So it's not an exact science. And unfortunately, this is all part of the education of, the EV adoption.
And listen,
But it doesn't. It dirty doesn't help when people are saying, "Oh, my car will go 320 miles," and then people buy them, and it's like, "But hang on a minute, it's only going like, it's I'm not getting anywhere near that."
right.
So that's the biggest thing that we're trying to say is, look, can we come up with an apples to apples comparison that says this is what we would expect to get in the real world, so consumers have got a opportunity to compare with like with like. And there's all sorts of ones, like Porsche Taycan's got a gearbox, so it massively overperforms the EPA, because on the EPA thing it's driving around in first gear, but if you're on the highway the car switches into second gear and
Yeah,
you get massively
changes.
more
It's
range.
it's a
Yeah.
game changer for
So
sure, which is interesting because you need to be able to talk about that and explain why it beat the estimates. But also, I mean, at some point soon, we're gonna have to be having conversations about the not the battery technology, but the technology surrounding the battery in each vehicle. Like you mentioned, the difference between Audi and Ford Mach-E, uh, temperature control, things like that. Like how are you warming the battery or cooling the battery in certain environments? And some manufacturers may do it better, and they're going to learn more stuff over time. So that may be a conversation, even something worth testing in the future when it becomes, I don't know, more testable, I guess. Or right now, I don't know that we know enough about the technology or the manufacturers. They're still learning, right? They're got to be pulling constant data logging.
yeah, it's fascinating. And also the convergence and, maybe a segue back into CES, but the convergence there of like automotive meets consumer tech is huge,
Yeah.
because everybody's talking about, oh, you can watch Netflix in your car, or you can do this in your car. Now Chat GPT is in your car. And so there's just this huge convergence, and all the manufacturers are suddenly hiring, I think we talked about this last week, are suddenly hiring all these different types of people. So instead of it being, a guy with a torque wrench, suddenly, you're going down to Silicon Valley and poaching the very best talent to come work on your car. And then it's just an arms race as who can get the best talent together.
Yeah, right. All right. So you mentioned Chat GPT. So let's get into CES a little bit. I think it was Volkswagen that is talking about putting Chat GPT in the vehicle. How is it different from Alexa? It's just like now you're like, hey, instead of going, call my friend, I got some questions, Alexa, now, or Siri or whatever. Now you're like, write me a paper on the history of, the Vietnam, or like it's just gonna do your homework for you. Like, how is it different?
Yeah, well, it's kind of that, right? Isn't it? Because Alexa or Siri stuff is, I mean, there are like crossovers, but the idea is Alexa and Siri is more about commands or simple questions. Chat GPT is, as you say, it's artificial intelligence writing pieces for you. And obviously it's a big there's a lot of scrutiny on this, shall we say, my industry at the moment, because it's almost like a computer journalist. So the idea in a car is, like you've got your kids, and this was actually shared to me. You have your kids in the back seat, and it's like, Daddy, can you read me a bedtime story? So you ask Chat GPT to tell them a story about, wizards in the mountains, and in theory, it will do that. Or you can, just drive along on your own, talking to like a kind of equivalent, almost like a Wikipedia. So it's
Did it
so, but
work?
Volkswagen have brought it in and they were saying it's also like you can have a more of a kind of open conversation about Italian restaurants or recipes in the local area, and instead of it, and then it will kind of then talk to the navigation system and take you to the restaurant if you wish, and things like this. But I got the impression it's kind of early days, and it's on the cars in Europe, but there's a few complications in the US apparently, so it's not here yet.
Right. Although that's not a big deal because I mean CES has sort of taken over as the launch of concept cars and features of cars, forward looking stuff. It kind of took that over from some of the auto shows. Most of the auto shows we have now don't really have a lot of concept cars, really. There's a few things that pop up, or although they probably lean more like pre-production as opposed to concept car. But I don't know, CAS has sort of become that.
Yeah, it's huge. And the other thing, actually, going before we chase it on the Volkswagen, they sort of arbitrarily debating whether they should stop you asking certain questions. So we did a little video on the Instagram thing that I know you saw, Matt, which was like, hey, and it's Ida. You have to say like Ida. What do you think of Elon Musk? And it basically says, I'm not allowed to answer that. And I was like, why are you doing this? Because it's like my car, I bought it. Should I go ask it whatever I like?
Yeah.
And so they're deliberately working out like, are there things that you can ask? Can you talk about subjects that are off limits? And so that I don't like that. Philosophically, I don't like that at all. It's my car. If you're introducing this technology, I don't want a few boffins in Wolfsburg in Germany telling me questions I cannot and cannot ask as part of my,
Right.
car experience. But it
Yeah.
was a bit weird.
And again, maybe that evolves, or maybe it has potentially some sort of open source format to it, so people can sort of contribute like a wiki, like Wikipedia, because the next thing is going to be like Chat GPT is going to spit all this information for us, and then there's going to be fact checking all the information because Chat GPT takes it all from the internet,
Yeah, which is
right?
not a good source of
Which
truth
is not really
generally.
the good source of real information,
Yeah,
you know? So, I mean, you can
yeah.
ask it to do your homework for you, but who knows if it's correct? Chances are it's not, you know? So
It,
it's kind of an interesting thought. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea for sure.
it is an issue. I think everybody's just looking for the new thing, aren't they? It's like, okay, we've got Alexa in now. He's in a ton of cars. Siri is in almost everything through Apple CarPlay. Chat GPT, that's the next gadget. So it was kind of fun. I don't think it's going to revolutionize anything anytime soon, but it was kind of fun to play with.
Listen, and them doing it got attention. They're, the first to do it. And, who knows if it stays or not, but they wanted some headlines at CES and they got it. And it was a fun little feature for people to play with.
Uh,
So, we'll see where
and
it
if
goes
you
from
if
there.
you and if you don't know, so we talked a lot on this show about like the death of the auto show, and you've been used to going to auto shows, which has been a bit depressing.
Yeah.
CES is like auto shows in the absolute heyday where like Samsung, I had a little bit of time at the end of the day yesterday before I flew home just to like go and check out the TVs and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like the Samsung stand, like I remember like going to Frankfurt Auto Show in the heyday where it was like you just knew that the Audi CEO has said, I don't care what it costs. My stand is going to be bigger and posher than BMW's. And BMW's gone, no way. And they
Yeah.
were just like spending, I think Audi one year spent like 200 million euros just building a stand. And so it just got ridiculous. And it felt like that at CES. Like the Samsung booth was off the planet. And then the LG booth was like similar. And then Sony had its thing. And it was all
Yeah.
about transparent TVs, which are very cool. We're getting off subject, but
Although
check out
actually, honestly,
transparent
I saw
TVs.
that too. I saw the LG transparent TV, and it's just like when your
Yeah.
TV's off, it's a piece of glass and you can see
Yeah.
right through it. So if you have a view or something, you could just stare right through your TV, and then when you turn it on, it becomes a TV. I think,
All the car guys struggle a bit at CES because cars are interesting and the tech's fascinating, but like when you're up against that kind of thing, the wow factor is
yeah.
probably in like a transparent TV.
Although, I mean, we're probably not that far off from that being into cars. Right now, we have our
Yeah,
heads-up display. We've got a little bit of a graphic, but why isn't the entire front windshield at some point, a screen of sorts, right? Either for the
yeah, I like
driver
that
or the
idea.
passenger. If we're having a transparent TV, why not have something on the screen? Like, almost with hand gestures and whatever, you could just flop around your hand in the middle of the car on a screen, and it's, all of a sudden you're in a Tom Cruise movie, you're in Minority Report.
Yeah, or you just when you stop, instead of having the screen turn into TV, you could have the whole windscreen turn to TV. The whole thing becomes like a cinema. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
we had a flying car. Hyundai had a flying. I went to the unveil of it. Like you've been to auto shows, but like around the world, it's like, oh, there's another flying car. Great, yeah, it's been done in a shed. We'll never see it. But this one's actually backed by Hyundai. They set up this like little sub company called Supernal, which has 600 people working for it. But like the interior of this little plane thing was designed by Luke Donkervolker of Lamborghini fame, who now like heads up all Hyundai's design. And it's a really weird thing because it's electrically powered. It's like a propeller plane, and the idea is it's a taxi to get you shorter distances. So if you live in LA, you land at LAX, you get into this thing, and it takes you to Hollywood.
Yeah, or downtown LA or something, right? It's
Yeah, and they're saying it's as quiet as a dishwasher in terms of decibels.
So there's a couple thoughts here. So we're starting to see a few of these things that fall into the category of flying car. And it looks more like a drone that carries people, right? It's got a whole bunch of blades on it, helicopter type blades or whatever that's going on, rotors and stuff on it. But up to this point, I haven't really seen a car manufacturer, a vehicle nameplate be associated with the development of these vehicles until now, what you're talking about with Hyundai.
Yeah, and I think what's everybody's doing, and this has like been the buzzword for a little while, is like, don't think of us as a car company, we're now a mobility provider. And I think
Right.
it's also because like future proofing themselves, they're saying, look, 10 years' time, we'll have robo taxis and all the rest of it. So we need to diversify. And that's kind of what makes this interesting because it's got like Hyundai behind it. It's got like proper investment. They're not a startup running around asking for venture capitalism. They're asking, this is Hyundai.
Yeah.
The only weird thing about it is like, is it a flying car? Well, it doesn't drive anywhere, and it's actually much bigger than you think. It's much bigger than a helicopter because it's got wings. So I was a bit like, it could take off vertically like a helicopter. So it's like a cross between a helicopter and an aeroplane, but it takes off vertically, and it's electric,
Yeah.
but it doesn't drive anywhere. So it just hops. Basically, goes up. It goes 15. I think it's like 1,500 feet. And the other thing about it, and I'm sure this will improve over time, is it seats 4 plus a pilot, range of up to 40 miles, which isn't very far.
Yeah. I mean, for the first generation of vehicle and sort of the test version of it, uh, I wouldn't expect it to be more than I mean 25 miles on the low end. It's a 25 to 40 mile is a little short, but I was expecting because it's about I don't know, it's maybe a 30-mile trip from LAX to downtown LA, but not necessarily as the crow flies. So if you could just lift off and get to a rooftop in downtown LA, I can't say for sure exactly what it is, but
Be a
without
big
looking it
rooftop.
up, yeah, it'd be a big rooftop. But I mean, seems like that's enough range to get there,
I mean,
and
you
then
got to worry.
charge your flying car for 12 hours and then do the trip again.
Well, as long as Tesla's not doing the range estimates, we'll be fine. But you don't want to get, you don't want to get. Can you imagine like taking off in downtown LA, flying back to LAX? You get it down to like somewhere over the 405, and then suddenly like your range gets a bit dicey because it's a bit colder out. I think
Yeah.
range anxiety takes on like a whole new dimension if you're airborne.
Yes, for sure. And I guess all of that needs to be taken into consideration. I mean, they're going to have to do they're going to have to limit things to like 10 miles or like it's 10 miles. Like
Yeah,
you can get from the beach to, Hollywood,
yeah.
as,
It's
in the air and on your 25 to 40 miles of range. If you could go 10 miles, you're fine.
it's early days. It's early
It's
days.
early days.
It's
It's an
cool.
interesting idea. I mean, out here it seems like a little interesting because we have so much traffic, so you'd want to be able to
Yeah.
fly one of these things if it's fairly inexpensive. But also, it's like we have so much clutter out here with buildings and streets and cars and buildings and all kinds of stuff that I don't know where you take off and land anyway. Like people are going to be trying to make and so many buildings are old, so it's not like you can start retrofitting a lot of landing pads of sorts. Um, and I don't know. It seems like I think wasn't Uber like trying to invest into something like this or looking into the future viability of this? Then
Yeah,
maybe they do it in New York. Maybe they have like their version of the helicopter short transport.
yeah. I've done that before. It's Blade, isn't it? Gets you from JFK to downtown. It's like $200,
Yeah.
which saves you like an hour of your life and is quite cool. So yeah, it's fun, and like you are feeling that these things are getting a little bit closer, and they're talking about like 2028. We'll start to see this thing. So
Yeah.
it's fun.
So moving on to Honda. Honda had some pretty interesting debuts there as well.
Yeah, Honda's like had a rebrand around EVs, because like we talked about before, Honda's been slow to the EV game. They had a little EV in Europe, which they no longer sell, which they couldn't bring to America because of crash tests and everything else. And then they've had this GM based Prologue, which they're about to launch, who are
Yeah.
driving it literally this month, which is basically borrowing GM architecture, the Ultium platform. But this is Honda, and then Honda's no longer working with GM. That's been announced. So this is Honda doing its own thing, and it's set up this. It's had like a rebrand, so you now have like a different Honda badge. And
Yeah.
so there's probably a sign of them trying to get serious about it, and they're calling it this sort of zero zero series, which apparently is a sort of double play. It's supposed to mean it's a clean sheet of design, and there's also a kind of obviously play on zero emissions. But what they showed was really interesting. The one that's particularly pertinent to America is what they're calling a um this sort of saloon or sedan, I suppose it should be over here, which looks a lot like a Lamborghini Countach. There's a lot of like Gandini wedge about it,
Right, but a
and
futuristic version, a
a
little
futuristic. I
like
was, yeah,
if you saw the movie The Wraith with Charlie Sheen from back in the day, it's got a little bit. Although I'm pretty sure that was a Chrysler, but it's got a little bit of that kind of going on into it. It's a little futuristic kind of.
Total Recall as well. That's
Yeah,
the thing I was
yeah,
thinking of.
maybe a little bit of a Demolition Man. I think they had the. It's kind of this
That's right.
odd shape.
That was Stallone, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
God, Matt, that's like 20 years ago. I think like our references are getting a bit. It's like
uh,
Blade Runner,
yeah.
Terminator.
So a little bit of that, but you're right. It has kind of this 80s movie, futuristic movie from the 80s kind of feel to it. And then, the front also has kind of this big mouth with eyes,
Yeah.
these, that's kind of looking at you, and it's like a fish. Um,
Uh,
but
uh,
it's an interesting design, and I kind of like the direction that they're going with this.
Honestly, I really liked it. It actually, I think, looks better like a lot of modern cars. It looks better in real life, even though it does in the pictures. It's very out there for Honda. We normally quite a conservative brand, and they're also saying like this is heading for that. I mean, they're saying that this is, not quite production ready, but this is not just like a CES special designed to, capture some attention. That they're really serious about this. So, and they're saying it's could be on sale for 2026.
Right. Let's
So
assume now they have to add all the ugly bits like the real bumpers and the mirrors and the door handles and all the stuff that makes it start to look ugly again.
uh, a little bit. It's got a license plate on the back, and it's got, it's
And what about
yeah.
the little van? They've got
So little van. There's a little van as well, which were the little sort of car like a cargo van that is not due to come to the US. That was the thing. That was the thinking anyway. I think it's called a space hub.
right.
Which
It's
designed
cool.
to,
The back is weird. Obviously, it's got to use cameras. There's no back glass. You can't see
yeah.
out of it without camera.
That everybody at CES, well, not everybody, a few people at CES were getting into this game. That Kia had something called the PV5, if I remember correctly. I went to the press launch, and I'm pretty sure it's called the PV5. They're doing which and this was something that everybody's been talking about again a long time, like a modular van. So
Yeah.
you start with the PV1 and you go all the way through to PV7. PV1 is like something that looks like a smart car. PV7 is like a full size, commercial van. And the idea is that they're all based on a sort of EV skateboard that scales up and down.
Right.
And
They
you
can
just
make
kind of
pickup
keep,
truck out of it. They can make a van out
yeah.
of it. They could cargo van, passenger van, that
And
kind
for
of thing.
like ever since it, like the whole idea of a skateboard chassis where you put the batteries in something that looks like a skateboard, motor at either end, and everything drive by wire. Everything since that originally came along is people say, well, you can do what you like with this. And finally, we're starting to see, people take advantage of this. And it looked it looked a little bit like Demolition Man or whatever it was. And then, but they're serious. They're going to build this thing and going to build this thing within a couple of years. And eventually it might be autonomous, blah, blah, blah. I mean, at first it will be it'll have a steering wheel. It'll be called a commercial vehicle, and Kia's gearing up to sell, commercial EVs, probably to the likes of Amazon and stuff. But a really interesting concept. And, this stuff is starting to get more serious, probably even 2025 for the first ones.
When you show this stuff at CVS, you're right. It's a little bit more consumer oriented. It looks like a passenger van, but the reality is it makes more sense for them to launch this as a commercial cargo van and go after, an Amazon as a client, or a FedEx or a UPS or something, even short range, local, sort of last mile stuff around town.
Yeah, but there's also, I mean, like Citroen and people in Europe have always done these kind of cool little vans that turn into passenger cars. That I always
Yeah.
been like, like as a little surf wagon or something like that. It'd be fantastic. Like like a cool minivan. Maybe
Yeah.
go up against the Volkswagen ID Buzz. And yeah, that like we're starting to see some really interesting stuff come through where you're actually taking advantage of the fact that it's an EV and that you don't need an engine and you don't need, a
Right.
ladder frame
You get
chassis
a
and all the
flat
rest of it.
floor.
Yeah, do what you like with
It
it.
becomes very, very modular. And you were saying the lineup is with Kia potentially, they have a small PV1, the PV5 you mentioned, and a PV7, which is a
PV7,
larger.
yeah, it goes all the
Yeah.
way through, and so it's like you could have an ice cream van one day, and they're also saying like this could be a taxi, it could be a mobility vehicle, it could be, you can sort of shape the interior according to to what you want. I thought it. I mean, it's not the most exciting thing to look at, but I thought the thinking behind it was pretty cool.
I love that they like all their, like, you know, computer images and the CGI images of the vehicles, and they're like, here's the cargo van, and it's in a little warehouse where people are, where it's getting filled with packages, and it's the packages are going out the door. There's nobody in sight. There's not a single person. They see the future of no employees in your warehouse. There's like a robot dog, and there's like a conveyor belt of packages, and there's like a robot arm to load the packages. There's not a single person. Goodbye, employees.
Yeah.
They're like, we're done with people. It's
Hello AI.
yeah, right. It's just all going to be taken over by that. Um, Tell me about VinFast as well. VinFast had a truck, but first of all, what's going on with VinFast as a company? They're here, they're around the corner from me. There's a little, I don't know, not like dealer, but a little sort of showroom with some test drive vehicles in the back. Uh, I'm just not hearing much about them, not seeing much about them. I get it that they're still new and they're probably going through the growing pains of like a lot of EVs like Mullen and some of the others out there, but um do they have a future?
Yeah, I mean, VinFast is another one of these with like seriously deep pockets. So VinFast is technically private, but has the basic state backing in Vietnam. So they have resource and they are serious about getting into the US market. They did a launch of the VF8, which didn't go very well, in that a lot of people were pretty critical of the vehicle, including us, to be honest. Um, but people said this about Kia and Hyundai 15, 20 years ago, and look at them
Yeah.
now. So they're a pure EV brand. They are, in many ways, they're into the US market faster than some of the Chinese brands, which, like BYD, which is now the biggest selling car manufacturer in the world, by the way. It's overtaken Tesla, but isn't here yet. So, they're trying to crack the market, but unfortunately, because they're all EV based, they're not coming in at like a super competitive price point. Initially, they were looking at ways of, do you like lease batteries relative to the car? And they're trying all these different business models, none of which seems to really have made any sense. So they're just going up against everybody else, which is a really tough ask. And they've had a pretty slow and tough start to life. And at CES, they showed off a mid-sized truck called the Wild, which actually looked pretty good. I mean, it was designed, I think, by an Australian design house. And this is there is a market for a mid-sized EV truck. So but I
I
mean, they're
hope
one of
this
the guys said,
design motif becomes a thing for them, because I agree with you. I popped into a VinFast, the SUV, the little one, and just wasn't impressed by anything. The quality of the interior, the look, the design of the whole thing. And now looking at some of the photos of this truck, this thing's cool.
yeah, I thought it was a good looking thing, and it's yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? And if you're gonna come in like as a new starter, you really need to be super competitive on price, so they just haven't been. And we were chatting about it at CS. It's like, oh, if we're coming under Rivian, if we're coming under Rivian, then it'll be like, you gotta be. I was like, they probably know far more about marketing car than I do, but it's like, really? You've got to be well under Rivian. you know, Rivian's like 80 grand or whatever. You've got to be well
Yeah.
under that to as a you know, as a startup brand in the US that isn't, you know, like Rivian's got the sort of like a bit of Silicon Valley cachet, you know, you don't. And Rivian's also got like a pretty decent head start now. So it's tough. It was another concept that I thought, actually, this is quite cool and feels very believable. But, you know, we'll wait and see. VinFast has had a pretty tough berth. But, you know, they've got deep
Yeah.
pockets and,
Listen,
you know, I think they'll ride it out.
for what it's worth, they seem to have nailed it at CES. They got a cool vehicle with a really cool interior design. I don't know how they capitalize on this buzz that they're getting from CES, but that's a cool looking vehicle. I just think I agree. They have a long way ahead of them.
They've got something called the VF9 coming out fairly shortly, which is a 3-row EV. But it's like, which is 7 seats. So it's kind of a Kia EV9, Rivian R1S, Tesla Model X rival. But it's like 80 grand. And
Yeah.
that's the starting price. And I just think it's a really tough sell.
Yeah, I think it's maybe even more than that. It could be like 84, 85 grand. And it's not bad looking. I haven't really seen the inside of it yet, but I don't know. I I just don't know that you can make these cars. I don't think you can get this much technology and stuff into these cars and expect to make any money. I'm not even saying they're going to make money at 80, 85 grand. It's more about how much are you willing to lose initially.
Yeah. Like the VF6, which is the new like little 5-seat thing. That probably looks the best looking to me. But I mean, like, you know, we're seeing so much of this. I mean, we just bought a Fisker last week, so that's quite exciting. So we can come in on and talk more about that. So
Yeah, you're gonna have to
that's
bring the
just joined the
Fisker
fleet.
over. I gotta take a look at that. We gotta go for a ride in that vehicle. I'm
You can try it.
interested. I'm interested in the Fisker because Enric Fisker is an intriguing person, and he's a great interview, and I like chatting with him. And I don't know him that well, but um, we've done stuff with him in the past on TV and on the podcast, and it's just an interesting design. An interesting model for the vehicle. And I like that it's sort of being outsourced to Magna to be built. So I don't know. I have high hopes for that vehicle. Although he's more of a design and marketing company, but doesn't mean it's not a bad vehicle. It has the
So
potential to be something decent.
yeah, I think the software's still got some distance to run, but yeah, it has a real potential. And the California road's very cool. So this is where you touch a button and all the windows, the roof opens, every window, including like the rear tailgate window, all go down.
Yeah.
So you got like a kind of glorified, like a kind of like a Targa effect. It's quite cool. So yeah, we'll talk about more. I haven't even driven ours yet. I think we picked it up last Friday. So
Which
I'm
version did you
excited
guys
to see
get?
that.
Like a launch edition? Did you get
Yeah,
all the
that's the thing, as we try and get them early. This has got all singing, all dancing, including the solar panels on the roof, which are designed to kind of help charge the battery. And
yeah.
there's some kind of, it looks cool, and there's some interesting thinking around the Fisker. I think that's where VinFast is struggling as well. Like, you can sort of talk yourself into buying a Fisker because there's like a few little gadgets in it and it looks quite cool and it's kind of an interesting story. Whereas VinFast at the moment, you know, it's all kind of like, well, it's a fairly sort of conventional SUV. So either it has to be super cheap or it has to be, you know, do something amazing. And they're not really doing either at the moment. So we'll see.
What's also interesting is these EV companies, these EV startups, they somehow or another they've all managed to take someone in charge of the company and push them toward the forefront media wise and turn them into a face of the brand. Obviously Elon Musk with Tesla, but Enric Fisker with his brand, Rivian with their guy, VinFast doesn't really have it. Some of the other companies don't really have it. Like and it almost, you can do it with a designer, you can do it with an engineer, you can do it with an owner. Like look at what Dodge has done, or Stellantis with like Ralph Gilles, or you know, like you start to push somebody, certainly somebody human toward the forefront, to be the face of the company, sort of the spokesperson for the company. Honest, look what Jaguar did with Ian Callum.
Yeah, Ian Callum was probably the prime example of that. A very genius, he's a lovely guy, and you know I both know well, and you know, sort of a genial Scot who did a great job of, you know, narrating the brand. And then, but you know, obviously there's also risk attached to, you know, as we see with Elon, of, you know, having such a
I
powerful
mean, there
figurehead.
is, and that's an extreme example, but yeah, you take guys like Ralph Gilles, you take guys like uh even like a Tim Kuniskis, say how outspoken he is now as the head of Dodge, or well, I don't even know what his title is now. He just keeps
Yeah,
changing.
I mean,
But
Jim Farley has built a big personal
Jim
profile
Farley's
at
been doing
Ford.
it, right? And that's a big part of the thing. Like, listen, Ian Callum, you're the head of design. You have a lot of responsibilities, but you know, pack your bags, because you're going to auto shows, you're doing press, you're doing interviews, you're doing Zoom, you're doing, like, you're going to be doing all of that
Yeah,
stuff now as well.
you're not really designing much for a while. Yeah,
yeah. So, you know, it's really about put together the best team you can, oversee that team the best you can, and then you're sort of at the beck and call of your
yeah.
marketing department as well. Like, uh, I honestly, Jim Farley is a good example, because he is very involved with so much at Ford as the CEO of the company. That's a big job. Um, and he's got answers to anything you can ask him about that company. He's very knowledgeable about what's going on, and still
Yeah,
has to do
I know
road
people
trips
with.
and interviews, and did a podcast, by the way. His second season, I think, just dropped today. You know, busy guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. Those guys are pretty. Not just guys. I mean, obviously, Mary Barrett at GM, and a lot of female leadership now. But there is a lot of, you know, that they are impressive individuals, and it's just, you know, the ability to just work and work and work is phenomenal. But I know a lot of people within Ford, obviously, and you know, his ability to handle detail and to retain information is phenomenal. So, but there's a reason why he's CEO of Ford, right? You know,
Right. And it wasn't just handed the job either. He's been
yeah,
at the game for a long time and at other car companies and
exactly.
stuff. Before we wrap up, I saw a quick thing. I just saw it on the Edmunds Twitter or X or whatever it's called. Um, I saw a bunch of G wagons spinning around in circles.
Oh yeah, this happened last night on this happened last night on the strip. Clint from our team was there. He came to me yesterday afternoon. He said, "I'm going to stay an extra night because there's a bunch of G wagons doing pirouettes down the strip at midnight. Is that okay?" I was like, "Yeah,
Yeah, like,
go for
all
your
right.
life." All right. Yeah, because the G wagon has got this thing where I think it like turns in its own axis or something. Or whatever the expression
I,
is.
I guess it's an EV version. That's what they're
Yeah,
promoting.
it's the G wagon EV, and it was on the stand as a concept. We saw this before. If I read it on our social channels, God, probably a year ago, when it was on some event and spinning around on dirt, and they did like pirouetting G wagons down the strip last night. So I'd flown home. I was tucked up in bed, but it looked quite cool.
Yes, it looked kind of fun. They had this kind of dance going on, like you were saying, that was kind of interesting. Probably cool to see in person. But yeah, just another function of sort of the EV, what they can do. If you're putting electric motors, four of them, one on each wheel, you can spin them forward, spin them backwards. You
Yeah,
can,
we're seeing a lot of this stuff like tank. What do they call it? Tank walks, crab crawls, whatever.
crab walk and
Yeah, crab walks, tank turn, crab walk, and tank turn. I
tank
think is what it
turn.
is.
Yeah.
Again, it's like finally we're actually starting to see, you know, we're all promised that like EV is going to have a whole world of opportunity. Finally, we're starting to see more of this happen. So it's going to be a neat. You just imagine that, you know, like the G Wagon electric is going to be all over LA. You just imagine like on Sunset, people start doing that. It's going to happen.
Oh, well, it seems like an interesting feature. I don't know how
What's it do
complicated
for
it
your
is to do
tires?
it. Yeah, I don't know what it does for your tires, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, it was kind of fun to see. I just saw it pop up. I just thought I'd mention that real quick before we wrap up. So yeah, CES was good. I hope to make it out there. It seems like it was great. Hope to make it out there maybe next year. Uh, it's just so early in January. You really kind of just hitting the ground running when it comes to getting back at it in January. And like you said, quick trip for you guys. I don't even know if you were there for 48 hours, but
I was there for about
hey,
40 hours, but it's like 150,000 people go from all over
yeah.
the world. It's an amazing event. And you know, if you're a bit of a tech geek and like I am, then it's fascinating, not just for the cars. You've got to build in a bit of time to go and see the tellies and the hair dryers and all the other stupid stuff.
Yeah, but it's been pretty interesting stuff that is I would love to see more of it.
The camera
But like
kit
I
as
said,
well.
it's
Like
been
somebody, I did a Canon demonstration. They took a portrait of me and then they emailed it to me, and it's basically like a 3D still where it can like zoom in on your face. It's a bit disconcerting. I shared it on my Instagram. You can zoom in on your face and then like rotate around you, and it's like, I don't know, 55 megapixels or whatever it is, and it was extraordinary. So some of the camera tech as well. If you're a film buff, there was some extraordinary things. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's
the
amazing
cars were
how
an
much
excuse.
all this camera technology that we already have, and we can't get one clear picture of Bigfoot.
Crazy, or Loch Ness monster.
Yeah, right. All right, Alistair, thanks so much. We're gonna wrap things up, but yeah, well, next week we'll get into some more.
Okay, sounds great. Have a
All
good
right,
week, everybody.
thanks, guys. Until next time, keep the air in the spare and the bag in the wheel.